You wake up, you check your phone, you scroll through 40 things you have to do today, and your chest tightens before your feet even hit the floor. Now picture a person 40,000 years ago, waking up in the same body you have, with the same brain you have. No calendar, no inbox, no boss. You'd assume their life was a desperate scramble for survival, every waking hour spent hunting, gathering, starving, repeating, but the real answer is far stranger. For most of human history, your ancestors worked less than you do, much less. And the reason why says something uncomfortable about the life you're living right now. Let's start with the assumption you were taught. Cavemen, brutish and short-lived, fighting for every scrap of food from dawn until dark. It's a tidy story. It's also mostly wrong. That story didn't come from careful observation of actual hunter-gatherers. It came from philosophers who never met one, imagining what life must have been like before agriculture, before cities, before the comforts you take for granted. They filled in the blanks with their worst assumptions, and those assumptions calcified into fact. It took someone actually walking into the desert with a notebook to find out how wrong they were. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee traveled to the Kalahari Desert to study the Juhoanzi people, a hunter-gatherer society living much like humans did for tens of thousands of years. He expected exhaustion, he expected scarcity. What he found instead shocked him. The adults he studied spent around 15 to 20 hours a week acquiring food, not 70, not 60, 15. The rest of their time went to rest, storytelling, socializing, and simply doing nothing in particular. Lee published his findings, and another anthropologist, Marshall Salins, took the data further. Salins coined a phrase that flipped the entire narrative on its head. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. Not affluent because they had more stuff, affluent because they wanted less and had time for everything they wanted. There are two ways to make people feel wealthy: give them everything they could ever want, or shrink their wants until what they already have feels like plenty. Salins argued hunter-gatherers found the second path and found it without ever writing an economics textbook. Sit with that for a second. Your ancestors, working a fraction of your hours, needing almost nothing they didn't already have. How does that square with your Tuesday? With the mental list of things you're saving for, the notifications reminding you what you don't yet own, the quiet sense that satisfaction is always one purchase, one promotion, one milestone away. It gets stranger. Decades later, an anthropologist named James Sussman spent years living among the Juhoanzi himself, documenting their daily rhythms in extraordinary detail. He found something that modern economics has no good word for: an economy built on enough, rather than an economy built on more. There was no stockpiling, no accumulating surplus for its own sake. When food was gathered, it was shared immediately, eaten, and the search began again only when it was needed. Why didn't they just gather extra, store more, build wealth the way you're taught to? Because in a world without refrigeration, without banks, without property lines, surplus was a burden, not a blessing. Extra food spoiled. Extra possessions had to be carried on foot across the land. Hoarding didn't make you secure. It made you slower, heavier, and a target for envy in a tightly knit group that depended on trust. So the smartest strategy wasn't to accumulate. It was to work only enough, then stop. Your brain, the exact brain sitting in your skull right now, evolved inside that rhythm. Work in bursts. Rest in abundance. Share instead of hoard. That rhythm is not a relic. It's your default setting. Think about what that 15-hour week actually contained. A morning spent tracking animals, reading footprints in dry soil, listening for movement in brush. A few hours gathering roots, nuts, and fruit. Work that doubled as a walk through familiar land. Then, once enough was collected, the day belonged to something else entirely. Sussman documented afternoons filled with music, arguments settled through conversation, children mimicking adults in play, and long stretches of what looked, to modernize, suspiciously like boredom. Except it wasn't boredom. It was rest without apology. Compare that to your own afternoon. When was the last time you stopped working simply because you had done enough, with no guilt trailing behind you? Which raises an uncomfortable question. If leisure was the ancestral norm, when did work become the center of everything? The shift didn't come from hunting and gathering, it came from farming.